You start out by saying you're not knowledgeable about the topic. Fair enough, there are 10,000 topics I'm not knowledgeable about, and where you have much more knowledge. I'm quite certain of that. But this is not a particularly complicated situation right now. The Israeli government is openly, unabashedly, flagrantly, blatantly, it's declared a war of genocide on the people of Gaza. That's not exaggerated language. The Prime Minister of Israel said in a speech which has been reproduced everywhere, he said, this is a war against Amalek, referring to the Old Testament. And what's a war against Amalek? Well, just open up the Old Testament. It obliges Israel to kill every man, woman, and child. That's what it means to invoke a war against Amalek. Can there be any doubt? Now, I mean this seriously. Can there be any doubt in the minds of any objective observer when Israel declares a policy of prohibiting any food, water, fuel, or electricity from entering Gaza, if that's their declared policy? Now, I know that you're an expectant mother, so bear in mind what that means to you. Now, Ms. Owens, I'm not sure if you are aware that 1/2 of the population of Gaza, its total population is 2.3 million, about 1.15 million are children. They're like the child that you have and the child that you are expecting. But I do not believe that you as a mother would say it's manipulative, it's demagogic for me to say it is not a complicated question when a country has a declared policy of denying a population food, water, fuel, electricity. That is not complicated. So I won't even allow for the option of saying, well, I'm ignorant, I don't know. Sorry, it doesn't require a lot of knowledge. And at the risk of offending some of your listeners, if you saw Jews being shoved into gas chambers, it would not require a lot more knowledge to know there's something awry here, something very egregiously, horribly wrong going on. Every hospital in Gaza now has been disabled. Every hospital has been disabled. You're an expectant mother. Do you really have doubts, questions, reservations, qualms about whether that is right? Every few years, literally every few years, Israel has a policy of what it calls mowing the lawn in Gaza. I've written quite a lot on those mowings of the lawn. But I have a question for you. And I do not believe these are rhetorical questions. These are factual questions. How do you react? You as a human being, as a woman, as a mother, how would you react to the usage of that phrase, mowing the lawn of a people, when 1.1 million of those people are children? Do you get that? Mowing the lawn of 1.15 million children. Now, that may be the first time you've heard that expression.
It is.
But I've heard it for years and years and years. And nobody even bats an eyelash at that expression, to mow the lawn in Gaza. In 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead, they mowed the lawn, killed 350 children. 2014, Operation Protective Edge, they mowed the lawn again, killed 550 children. And now they're mowing the lawn again and have killed 4,000 to date, 4,500 children. They make up these stories that we have to turn off the incubators in the hospitals because there's a Hamas command and control center in the basement, say, most recently of Al-Shifa Hospital. And then the spokesperson for our US Department of Defense, John Kirby, he gives a news conference 3 days ago, and he says, we have intelligence information confirming that there is a Hamas command and control center. And that justifies in the minds of the public opinion that then it's okay to deny fuel to the incubators. Imagine you, Candace, your child is born prematurely and is put in an incubator where the fuel is cut off, and your child that you've been carrying for 9 months suffocates to death. Was there a Hamas command and control center in Gaza? Answer, no. Was Hamas's leadership in the basement of Al-Shifa Hospital? Answer, no. Were there hostages beneath Al-Shifa Hospital? Answer, no. You just get the lies and more lies and more lies and more lies. And attendant upon those nonstop lies are the cessation, the termination of life because of the lies, the termination of life of thousands of Palestinian children. Is that complicated? Does it require a PhD in Middle East studies to figure these things out? That government in Israel, in cahoots with our own government, spread the lies about Hamas's command and control center to justify denying the fuel for the incubators. Now, I'll tell you something, Candace. I live in an apartment building. I go into my elevator, and there will be a parent with the kids. And I look at the kids, and like an old man that I am, I say hello to the kids, smile to the kids. And all of a sudden, I get overcome with this sick feeling because I look at the kid and then I see those pictures from Gaza. I see those incubators. With all due regard to your audience, sorry, not complicated.
That when we just saw this march in Washington, the pro-Israel protest, that whether you believe that these people are not educated or you believe that what's happening is wrong, the majority of those people that showed up, do you, and I'll ask the question to you, really believe that each and every one of those people that were in D.C. want the Palestinians to be genocided? Or do you think that they believe that they are fighting for a just cause?
Okay. Israel has made not one, not two, not 10, not 20, in its various leadership capacities, genocidal statements in the last 7 weeks. That's number one, okay? I have two friends, Yaniv Kogan and Jamie Stern-Weiner. They compiled this list of pages and pages of statements by the Israeli government the past 7 weeks, which are genocidal in content and in intent and in result. Number two, I have to ask you the question, and I'm willing to hear you out, okay? If you have a declared policy, no food, water, fuel, electricity, and part of the purpose of the ceasefire is to allow fuel to come in. If the people in Washington do not support the access of the people of Gaza, they oppose the access of people in Gaza to food, water, fuel, and electricity. How would you describe that policy? They're against the ceasefire. They're against the humanitarian pause. Mm-hmm. When Van Jones, yesterday at the rally, when Van Jones said he was for the ceasefire, or he said he was for, I don't think he didn't use the word ceasefire, but it was clearly implied he wanted some break in the hostilities.
Preservation of civilian life, I think.
Right.
Something along those lines.
He got booed down.
Yeah.
He got booed down. So you're asking me a question about whether in each of their minds they fantasized about the extermination of every person in Gaza, to which I say I can't read their mind. What I can say is they attended a rally in Washington which supported the government's policy of denying food, electricity, fuel, and water to the people of Gaza. That, again, in my mind, but you can disagree with me, is not a complicated question. That is a very rational decision to support genocide. That's a rational decision to support genocide. It does not require, as I said,
what do you make of their arguments? Well, if they just turn over the terrorists, then they would have everything back.
If they just turned over
the terrorists, pardon me, I misspoke. If the terrorists just turned over the hostages, they would have everything back.
Well, there are two answers to that. And again, I'm going to encourage you to keep asking me the questions. Number one, that's not Israel's declared policy. Its declared policy is to wipe out or expel the population of Gaza. Israel has repeatedly said, we do not accept the distinction between the civilian population and Hamas. They have repeatedly said, we are going to flatten everything in Gaza and turn it into a tent city. You can find numerous statements. So it's not true that the goal now is to return the hostages. But for argument's sake, let's agree that is the goal. I'm all for freeing the hostages. However, all the hostages, the 240 Israelis being held hostage, and the 2.3 million people of Gaza who have been held hostage for 20 years. Yes.
So
free the hostages, free all the hostages. By international law, that blockade of Gaza is a crime against humanity. Under international law, there are three kinds of crimes. One, you of course know, war crimes. And then there's a second kind called crimes against humanity. And then the third crime, of which you of course know, genocide. What's happening now in Gaza hovers between a crime against humanity and a genocide. So
a couple of questions I want to ask you, just to push back on your point about a genocide. I had actually sent a tweet a while ago. I was actually referring to Brian Mast's commentary in Congress, which I found to be unacceptable. The concept that there's no such thing as innocent civilian life on one side of the conflict, to me, is abhorrent language. I covered it on my show, and I think it sets the stage. I think what he said, I hadn't heard the Israeli government say that, but because I'm always responding to American politics, it was dehumanizing, and it makes a justification for killing everyone. But what I want to ask you about your perspective, and it is a genocide. First and foremost, what would be the upside if you were the Israeli government to committing a genocide against the Palestinian people? I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Sure.
You see people protesting all around. Why would you think this is something that you're going to get away with if that is in fact the goal, with everybody watching?
Okay. If you allow me, there are two separate questions. The first question is whether it's a genocide. And as I said, at the risk of boring the audience, if you deny food, water, electricity, and fuel, it's a genocide. That to me is a no-brainer. However, there is the question that you just raised, a perfectly reasonable question. And the reasonable question is, why? Is it something in the Israeli DNA? No, I don't think so. Because Gaza for them, for Israel, has always been a problem. Because they refuse, if I can put it this way, they refuse to just languish and die in a concentration camp. They refuse. And so periodically, you know the famous expression, wherever there's oppression, there's resistance. So periodically, there is resistance, and Israel mows the lawn. But after October 7th, it decided, number one, this was obviously a resistance of a much higher magnitude, what happened on October 7th. And also, it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to solve the Gaza question. Now, during the first week, and we're not talking about ancient history now, we're talking about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. During the first week, they were hoping to expel all the Palestinians to Egypt, an ethnic cleansing, just clean out Gaza. That was the goal. It didn't work because the head of state of Egypt says, no, Gaza is your problem, not ours. You're not going to put all these people in the Sinai desert, and it's going to become our problem. So that option was no longer available. With that option no longer available, how do you solve the Gaza question? You destroy Gaza. You make it uninhabitable. You turn it into a howling wilderness. And you kill off as many people as you can get away with, given international public opinion, which always acts as a constraint. And you have to acknowledge that Israel has been quite successful. Do you know that more children have been killed in Gaza in the past 5 weeks or 6 weeks? More children have been killed than in every other war zone in the world combined in the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. We have to acknowledge something seriously different happened after October 7th in terms of the avowed Israeli intention. Up until October 7th, the Israeli intention was to just keep these people confined in the concentration camp and leave them there to languish and die. But after October 7th, if you look at the avowed aims, it's clear that now they believe that they have a pretext, or at least they believed on October 7th. They now had a pretext and an opportunity because of the leeway given them by the European and American international community. They now had a pretext and an opportunity to solve the question altogether. And originally, it's true, they weren't aiming directly at a genocide, they were aiming at an ethnic cleansing. And they were very open about it. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu and our Secretary of State, Blinken, were going around trying to forgive some of the loans to Egypt from like the International Monetary Fund, because Egypt's economy is in shambles, heavily in debt. Half of its national income goes towards servicing the debt. So Secretary of State Blinken, Benjamin Netanyahu, they were trying to tempt the Egyptian government. If you take in the Gazans, then we'll get your loans forgiven. It didn't work. Egypt said, thanks, but no thanks. And then at that point, Israel was presented with a dilemma. What are we going to do? We want to solve this problem. And we have to say they're well on their way. 50% of the homes in Gaza, 50% have been either flattened or severely damaged. 50%. Now, Candace, I'm going to again ask you, I'm not going to ask you from a technical point of view, from the point of view of scholarly competence. How would you feel? 70% of those people already lost their home. They lost it in 1948 when they were expelled from Israel. They and their descendants. They live in refugee camps. They never had a home. And now for the second time, half the population has nothing to go back to. Do you know what it means? Actually, that's a rhetorical question because of course you know what it means. Do you know what it means to go back to your neighborhood and your neighborhood is flattened? You can't even figure out, where did I live? There's nothing there. There are entire neighborhoods, towns in northern Gaza. They have been annihilated. They've been vaporized. No, that's literally true. They've been vaporized. There's nothing to go back to. You can't even know where you were, where you lived. So Israel is, well on its way to achieving its goal. Whether it can? No, probably not. In my opinion, for what it's worth, the propaganda disaster with Al-Shifa Hospital the past couple of days is going to cause Israel a lot of problems, because now nobody's going to believe a single word it says. It was such a big story. The Hamas Command and Control Center in Al-Shifa Hospital, and it all turned out to be a farce. I knew it was a farce. I mean, I've studied it. If you go back and look at my tweets beginning 10 days ago, I said, this is all nonsense. There's no Hamas Command and Control Center in Al-Shifa Hospital. But now the lies have been exposed to the whole world. All those babies in those incubators died, suffocated because of the big lies. We were told we had to deny them fuel for the incubators because of that Hamas Command and Control Center. That's the reason that was given. That's why we denied the fuel for the incubators. A lie upon a lie upon a lie upon a lie. Do you know what my last book consists of? Chronicling across 450 pages the lies and lies and lies about Gaza. I spent 40 years, my whole adult life, just poring over those human rights reports about what's been done to those people. But if you didn't do what I do, you really wouldn't know. That's why everybody thinks, yeah, we should start with October 7th. That's when the story begins. But you know what? That's not when the story begins. That's where the story climaxed after being born into a concentration camp and living in that inferno for 20 years. They finally resolved to revenge the curse that had been inflicted on their lives. Gaza is the biggest concentration camp ever to exist. The biggest concentration camp ever to exist. But everybody wants us to believe the whole story begins on October 7th.